The breaking news with Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California is a key member of the House Intelligence Committee. Congressman, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.
Not only are you a key member of the House Intelligence Committee, your district in Los Angeles represents a big chunk of Hollywood, these studios, these people who work there. So you have unique perspective on this story from all sides. Do you agree with the decision by Sony to pull the release of this film?
I'm very concerned about the precedent, Wolf, of not releasing the film, and I hope that Sony can find a way to do that. I hope that some of these companies that would distribute it through on demand will step forward and do this, because otherwise it not only impacts this film, but you have to imagine that when studios think about now the next film that may parody some other dictator or parody the same dictator, they're going to think, do we want to risk going through what Sony did? The best response, I think, to a dictator who doesn't want this film released is to release it all over the world, translated in multiple languages, translated into Korean. I think they ought to push this film out as aggressively as possible. But we ought to help them.
What about those corporations, those businesses, private enterprise, that are afraid they'll be hacked by North Korea and they'll suffer enormous damage, or they could be the subject of a terror attack? How concerned should they be? You're privy to the intelligence.
Well, they have to be concerned about a cyber attack. This is just the world we live in now, and no corporation is going to be immune from this. In fact, we've been seeing cyber theft of our intellectual property and our trade secrets for many years now on an extraordinary scale. So this is a fact of life. And I think corporate America is going to have to decide how they're going to respond to this. They can respond by backing down, or they can respond by saying we won't be intimidated. And I have to hope they choose the latter course, because if they don't, I think they're only inviting further extortion of the kind we are seeing through this North Korean attack.
Congressman, let me play another clip. This is from Fareed's exclusive interview with Michael Linton, the Sony CEO.
You are well known as somebody who supported President Obama.
Yes.
Were you disappointed in what you heard today?
I would be fibbing to say I wasn't disappointed. You know, the president and I haven't spoken. I don't know exactly whether he understands the sequence of events that led up to the movies not being shown in the movie theaters. Therefore, I would disagree with the notion that it was a mistake. It's a generally held view by the public and the press that that's what happened, and maybe that's how that view was held by him. But knowing, as I do, the facts and how they've unfolded, you know, we stood extremely firm in terms of making certain that this movie would appear in movie theaters.
So what happened here? Was there not enough of a dialogue between Sony and the federal government?
Well, listen, I have great respect for Michael, and it's like, from what he's saying, that Sony feels its hand was forced, that you have these theaters who are saying, we're not going to exhibit it. And, you know, I imagine that there's a certain threshold that you have to have in terms of exhibition to make any kind of a screening of a film successful. So I think the story is not finished yet, because Sony is still considering putting this film out there. It wants to get it out before the American people and I think the world public. The question is, will Sony have partners? And I think what Sony is saying right now is, we don't have partners in this. We can't do this all on our own. And I think it's in our interest, it's in the White House interest, to encourage those other corporate actors to work with Sony, to have Sony's back, and to help distribute this film.
Because the damage that has been done to Sony, and that's a huge operation in Los Angeles and around the world, is, some would say tens of millions, some say hundreds of millions of dollars. And the people will say, you know, it's easy for Congressman Adam Schiff or President Obama to say, you know, just be a profile in courage and do the right thing. These businesses, they have to worry about their bottom line, and they're nervous about losing hundreds of millions of dollars and maybe even having their computer systems and their entire businesses shut down.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, these are my constituents. I probably represent more of the industry than any other member of Congress. You have the employees who are concerned about their personal privacy. You know, you read the stories about the celebrities whose privacy is invaded, but everyone had their data stolen, or it was a massive theft of data. The other studios have to look at that and say, you know, there but for the grace of God go I. So they're worried. Do they have adequate security? I mean, this is an unprecedented situation where you have a country attacking a single studio over a film. I mean, you couldn't write this stuff. And nonetheless, it has to be a real-life concern. So, listen, I think those concerns are absolutely valid. At the same time, these companies have to understand, and I think they do, what the impact will be if they're seen as backing down, if they're seen as allowing a dictator somewhere to decide their editorial content or their artistic content. So there's a lot at stake here, and I have to think the end result is going to be the distribution of this film.
I suspect no one is more surprised how this situation has exploded than Kim Jong-un himself. He's probably sitting there in Pyongyang and saying, how did this happen? Everybody is basically cowering in the face of what North Korea did.
It's absolutely extraordinary. Extraordinary that they would make such a big deal over a satire, and extraordinary that thus far it's been successful. But we have to make sure that there's a different ending to the story.
We have a lot more to discuss, Congressman. I want you to stand by, including what the U.S. should be doing about this. And with Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California, he's a member of the House Intelligence Committee, also represents a big chunk of Hollywood in Los Angeles. So what does the U.S. do now? How can the U.S. retaliate proportionately, as the president says, against North Korea?
It's very hard, because if we get in a cyber tit-for-tat with them, they can do a lot more damage to us than we can probably do to them, just because of the primitive conditions in North Korea and our incredible exposure. So I have to think the administration is really looking at what economic levers can it pull to make life difficult for the regime, for the cronies who surround Kim Jong-un. There are ways, I think, that we can tighten the financial screws to them, make them pay a price, and hopefully deter them from doing this again. But again, I think the biggest deterrent is to do what they wanted to avoid, and that is have the broad distribution of this film.
Yeah, the economic sanctions against North Korea by the United States, they're already pretty tight, but there are some areas where the U.S. could really take some steps to further punish North Korea.
There are. North Korea is engaged in a lot of illegal commerce with drugs, with other denied goods. And we can go after some of that illegal export that brings in money to the regime. We've done some of that in the past. I think we'll do it with a vengeance now, and look for other opportunities to make them feel the pain. But getting in a very public fight with them or getting in a very explicit cyber fight with them might either undermine our own capabilities or cause greater damage to be inflicted on our own businesses.
Now, you have no problem with the FBI conclusion that North Korea directly did this cyber attack?
No, I don't. I've talked to intelligence officials about it, and they use levels of certainty in describing their conclusion that you don't often hear from the intelligence community, and also looking at the facts of what we've been able to corroborate seems pretty overwhelming.
The president says there's no indication North Korea was acting in conjunction with any other country. You accept that?
I do. I haven't seen any evidence that some other countries were complicit. Now, these actors, they try to hide their actions by distributing their attacks in other parts of the world, but there's no indication that there were knowing partners elsewhere, and this looks like purely the result of the regime making a decision and then tasking its people with implementing it.
Well, he says no other country, but what about individuals outside of North Korea, subcontractors, if you will? Is it possible they were involved?
Well, it's certainly possible that people outside North Korea were involved. I mean, the infrastructure within the country is pretty limited. So to carry out sophisticated cyber attacks, they're going to use some combination of what they do inside the country and some combination of actors outside the country, whether those are all North Korean nationals or whether they employ the services of others. I think this is probably predominantly, if not exclusively, a North Korean operation. But they may have other players that are working with them.
Only China, presumably, could shut down that North Korean computer infrastructure. Isn't that right?
Well, China has the most leverage on North Korea, both in terms of its infrastructure, internet infrastructure, but also in terms of food and fuel. The question is whether we can get China to do any more than we have tried to get them to do in the past over the nuclear program. China's obviously worried about a collapse of the regime, lots of refugees, having essentially a South Korean government or a Western-friendly Korea, unified Korea on its border. So it's only going to go so far. But China has expressed increasing displeasure with the rogue nature of this regime and the fact that it draws American resources, naval and other, into the region, which China doesn't want. And if they can't control their bad boy in Pyongyang, they know they're going to invite a stronger American presence in the region.
Adam Schiff, thanks very much for coming in.
Thanks.